Aquí lo tienes, completamente corregido y pulido, manteniendo la misma estructura de párrafos. At a big family gathering, my dad looked at me in disbelief and asked, "Honey, why did you come by taxi? Is the car we gave you for your birthday already broken?" Before I could answer, my husband smiled and cut in. "That car belongs to my mom now. She needs it more than we do." My dad went quiet for a moment, and what he did next made me prouder of him than at any other time in my life. Before I tell you how that one sentence destroyed Ethan's life and saved mine, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. Now, let me take you back to that afternoon, when my dad's mansion was full of laughter and I had no idea a storm was about to start. Once a month, my father, Mr. Harrison, gathered our huge family at his main house, a modern colonial mansion with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a driveway lined with luxury cars. Sleek European sedans and massive SUVs worth tens of thousands of dollars glittered under the sun, the kind of scene Ethan loved because it made him feel important. My dad was a real estate tycoon, calm and widely respected. Ethan was his son-in-law, a mid-level manager in Dad's company, a position Dad had basically handed to him. Everyone knew it, and Ethan knew they knew, which only made him overcompensate harder. Inside, uncles, aunts, and cousins crowded around the buffet my father's favorite catering company had set up. Ethan sat at the main table beside my dad, wearing a shiny silk batik shirt and an absurdly flashy gold watch. He laughed too loudly at my cousin's jokes, chewing Wagyu steak like he owned the place. To people who didn't know him, he might have looked confident. To those of us who did, he looked like a man constantly trying to prove he belonged in a world that wasn't really his. Meanwhile, the sky outside turned heavy and gray as my taxi slowed in front of the high-security gate. Rain had started, thin needles hitting the hot pavement. I paid the driver in cash because the card machine was broken, then stepped out, lifting my handbag over my head to protect my pastel headscarf. No driver stepped forward, no umbrella waited for me. I ran across the wide driveway alone, passing the cars my own family owned, but that felt miles away from my life. I arrived at the huge front door, slightly out of breath, shoes splashed, dress damp at the hem. When I walked into the main hall, the noise dipped for a second. Conversations didn't stop completely, but they dimmed. Eyes slid over my modest clothes, my slightly wet scarf, my tired face, and then flicked toward Ethan in his silk and gold. I smiled at everyone, kissed my father's hand, and leaned in for a hug. Dad's sharp, loving eyes immediately dropped to my damp shoes and the raindrops on my shoulders. I saw the calculation in his gaze. A father's radar always finds what a daughter tries to hide. He put his spoon down so gently that the soft clink rang louder than it should have. Looking straight at me, then at the empty space beside Ethan where I should have been sitting, he asked calmly, "Claire, why did you come by taxi? Is the new Hyundai Palisade we sent last week already giving you trouble?" The table went quiet. I opened my mouth, searching for a way to protect Ethan. Before I could form a single word, Ethan swallowed his food, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and spoke for me. "Oh, that car," he said lightly. "It's my mom's now. She needs it more than Claire does." He chuckled as if he'd just shared something clever. Then, as if he felt he needed to justify it, Ethan added, "Claire just goes to the office and back. She dresses modestly, takes ride shares all the time anyway. My mom needs a big, impressive car for her social events so people don't look down on her. For Claire, taxis are simpler. No parking issues." Around the table, my aunts and uncles traded stunned looks. Everyone knew the car was my birthday present, not a toy for my mother-in-law's pride. I wanted the floor to swallow me. I wasn't ashamed of the taxi. I was ashamed of Ethan proudly confessing how little he valued me in front of my own father. My fingers twisted the edge of my scarf under the table. Dad just watched him, expression unreadable, as if he were studying a strange insect. Then, very slowly, a thin smile appeared on his lips, a smile that never reached his eyes. "I see," he said softly. "Thank you for being honest, Ethan." Ethan, foolishly, mistook that for approval and puffed up even more. Beneath the tablecloth, my father slid his phone from his pocket. Years of running a giant corporation had trained his hands to move quickly and quietly. Without even looking down for long, he typed a short message to his head of security and operations. Activate the asset recall protocol on the SUV assigned to Claire Harrison. That was all. One sentence sent a digital thunderstorm racing through the company's systems straight toward my mother-in-law's favorite playground, an upscale shopping mall across town where she and her friends like to show off. At that same moment, my mother-in-law, Linda, was standing proudly beside the shiny black Palisade in front of the mall's grand entrance. She wore clashing designer labels from head to toe, the kind of outfit that screamed money rather than whispered taste. Around her, a circle of social club friends hovered, some impressed, some secretly amused, all watching the show. Loud enough for everyone to hear, Linda bragged that her brilliant, successful son had bought her this car in cash, no loan, because business was booming. She never once mentioned my name or my father's. In her version of the story, Ethan alone had lifted them to the clouds. When she finally climbed into the driver's seat, still waving to her friends, Linda pressed the start button with a flourish, expecting the soft purr of the engine. Instead, the car emitted a harsh, continuous beep. The dashboard flashed bright red, every warning light blinking like a broken disco ball. A cold, robotic voice filled the cabin. Security alert. This asset is being operated by an unauthorized user. Engine locked by administrator. Security has been notified. Linda froze, then panicked. She stabbed the button again and again, hit the steering wheel, yanked the gear shift. Nothing. The car had turned into an expensive locked metal coffin in the middle of the drop-off lane. Outside, the horn began to blare in a rhythmic pattern, an anti-theft setting now weaponized against her. The echo bounced off the high glass ceiling of the mall, drawing attention from everywhere. Security guards, shoppers, taxi drivers, everyone turned to stare at the luxury SUV screaming in the middle of the entrance. Linda fumbled for the door handle, desperate to get out and escape the embarrassment, but the central lock stayed frozen. For a full 3 minutes, she was trapped behind the tinted glass as her friends started recording on their phones, hands over their mouths to hide their laughter. Back at my father's corporate headquarters, a young IT engineer watched a screen that showed the car's location and status. At my dad's command, he had triggered the immobilizer and horn remotely, then set a countdown. When the 3 minutes were up, more than enough for a shock and a lifetime of humiliation, he quietly unlocked the doors and pinged the exact coordinates to the company's asset recovery team, already waiting nearby with a tow truck. What Linda thought was a simple malfunction was actually the first wave of consequences washing over her. By the time Linda stumbled out of the car, makeup streaked and hands shaking, the bright orange tow truck with the Harrison Group logo was already pulling into the lane. 2 security officers in crisp black uniforms stepped down, not the greasy mechanics she had expected, but serious professionals carrying a folder of legal documents. In a clear voice meant to be heard by the gathering crowd, one of them explained that this vehicle was a company asset assigned to Claire Harrison and was currently being misused by an unauthorized party. He showed the paperwork. He asked her to step away from the car so they could reclaim it. Linda exploded. She clung to the steering wheel, shouting that the car was a gift from her son, that no one had the right to take it. She threatened to call the police, accused them of theft, and screamed Ethan's name as if he could materialize and save her. The guard stayed calm, gently but firmly pried her hands free and moved her aside. The tow truck's winch whirred, lifting the big SUV onto the flatbed in front of dozens of phones filming every second. By that evening, a video titled "Fake Socialite's Luxury Car Repossessed at the Mall" was racing through gossip pages and group chats across the city. While Linda's world collapsed at the mall, the mood at my father's house remained oddly peaceful. Soft piano music played as dessert arrived, small cakes and coffee. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his full stomach, occasionally burping without even bothering to cover his mouth. He was basking in what he thought was a victory. He had admitted giving away my gift, and my father hadn't yelled. In Ethan's mind, silence meant weakness. He had no idea the real punishment had already begun miles away on his mother's face. Then his phone, lying on the table, began to vibrate and blare a loud, cheap pop song. Several of my uncles frowned at the noise. Ethan snatched the phone, grinning when he saw Mom on the screen. He put the call on speaker without moving from his chair, clearly hoping everyone would hear Linda's excited thanks for the car. Instead, The room was filled with her hysterical screams. Between sobs, she wailed that thugs had taken her car, that security guards had humiliated her in front of her friends, that everyone had recorded it. The blood drained from Ethan's face. His shock quickly turned to rage and, as usual, he chose the easiest target, me. Slamming his spoon onto his plate, he shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the marble. In front of my entire family, he pointed a trembling finger at my face and shouted that I was an ungrateful wife, that I must have reported the car out of spite, that I had embarrassed his mother. His voice rose, veins bulging in his neck, words turning harsher and uglier by the second. I stayed seated, looking up at him with a tired, almost sad calm. I didn't even have time to defend myself. My father stood. He did not shout. He did not slam his fist or curse. He simply rose from his chair, laid his napkin on the table, and lifted one hand slightly. The room fell instantly silent. Even Ethan's rage seemed to freeze mid-air. Dad walked slowly around the table until he stood right in front of his son-in-law. His eyes, usually warm, were now as sharp and cold as a judge's. In a quiet voice that cut deeper than any scream, he explained that nothing was wrong with the car. The problem was with the person who had stolen his daughter's gift. He told Ethan that the SUV was registered as a corporate vehicle temporarily assigned to me, and that after hearing Ethan's proud confession, he had decided an unauthorized user was now behind the wheel. So yes, he said, the car was taken back, not by your wife, by the actual owner. Ethan's mouth opened and closed, struggling to process the humiliation. My father went on, his tone turning colder. You mentioned your mother is standing out there without a car now. You should go to her. A good son shouldn't let his mother wait on the side of the road. Ethan tried to recover. He stammered that he needed to get back to the office, that his work was important. Dad didn't let him finish. About that, he said, holding out his hand. Give me the keys to the company sedan you're driving. Ethan instinctively clutched his pocket, but under my father's steady gaze, his fingers slowly pulled the keys out. That car, Dad explained for everyone to hear, is a company car for employees. As of 5 o'clock today, your name is off the employee list. You're being terminated for serious ethical violations and misuse of company assets. You will no longer represent my company or my family. The words landed like stones. In one breath, Ethan lost his job, his status, and the last formal tie to my father's empire. My relatives stared, some shocked, some grimly satisfied. My father took the keys, then reached into his own pocket and pulled out a single crumpled bill. He folded it neatly and slipped it into Ethan's expensive shirt pocket. That, he said quietly but clearly, is enough for a bus or a cheap ride. Premium taxis are too expensive now. You told us Claire should learn to live simply. I think it's your turn. He then nodded to the two security guards who had been standing discreetly near the door. They did not lay a hand on Ethan, but their presence on either side of him left no room for argument. Ethan looked around the table, searching for someone to defend him, someone to say my father was being too harsh. No one spoke. My aunts and uncles averted their eyes. My cousins suddenly found their plates fascinating. I focused on refilling my mother's tea. Without another word, Ethan was escorted out of the dining room, down the gleaming hallway, and through the front door of the house where he had once strutted like a king. Inside, the conversation slowly resumed, as if someone had taken out the trash. Outside the gate, the sky finally broke open. Rain poured down in heavy sheets as the massive iron gate closed behind Ethan with a deep metallic thud. For the first time, he stood on the sidewalk not as the boss's son-in-law, not as a manager, but as a jobless man in a soaked silk shirt. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and opened a rideshare app, only to see a message saying drivers weren't allowed into this private neighborhood without homeowner authorization. His calls to the security post went unanswered. The only way out was a long, humiliating walk to the main gate, nearly 2 kilometers away. Ethan trudged along the narrow road, dress shoes splashing through muddy puddles, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. Every step felt like an insult. He cursed my father, cursed me, convinced himself this was all an overreaction to just a car. He didn't see that the car was only the last straw after years of entitlement. Halfway down the road, bright headlights flared behind him. A white SUV slowed as it approached. the same model as the one he had tried to give away. Through the clear window, he saw my father at the wheel, calm as ever, and me in the passenger seat with a hot drink cradled in my hands. For a heartbeat, Ethan's eyes met mine. He waited for me to plead with Dad to stop, to ask him to let Ethan in so he wouldn't have to walk in the storm. But I simply looked straight ahead. There was no hatred in my eyes, no revenge, only a quiet, heavy indifference. To me, in that moment, he was a stranger on the side of the road. The SUV rolled past, its tires sending a spray of dirty water across Ethan's already soaked trousers. He stood there stunned, watching the taillights disappear toward the world he'd just been expelled from. An hour later, Ethan arrived at the small rental house he liked to call our home, even though my salary had paid every bill. Inside, his mother sat on the sagging couch, still in the clothes she'd worn to the mall, mascara streaked down her cheeks, hair ruined by the rain. She didn't ask if he was okay. She launched straight into accusations, shouting that he'd failed her, that he'd let her be humiliated, that I was manipulating my father against them. Ethan, exhausted, exploded too. For the first time in his life, he shouted back at her, blaming her greed and obsession with appearances for everything that had happened. Eventually, hunger drowned out the shouting. They hadn't eaten since lunchtime at my father's house and Linda's aborted mall outing. Trying to prove he could at least provide food, Ethan grabbed his phone, opened a delivery app, and ordered a big family meal from their favorite fried chicken place. The total came to almost $100, but he didn't hesitate. He selected one of the many credit cards saved to his account, the ones he'd always used without thinking. The payment failed. Frowning, he tried another, then another. One by one, every card was rejected. Only then did he remember every card was a supplementary card on my accounts. I had closed them all. In a panic, Ethan opened his own banking app, hoping his salary account would save him. The balance on the screen barely covered a week of groceries. Most of his paycheck, month after month, had been drained by electronics bought for his mother, little luxuries he never thought twice about. And now, his job was gone. While he stared at the numbers, a shrill beeping began at the electric meter outside, an alarm warning that their prepaid balance was almost zero. When the last of the credit ran out, there was a loud click, and the house fell instantly black. No lights, no fan, no TV, just rain, thunder, and Linda's ragged sobbing in the dark. The next morning, after a night spent sweating in the heat and swatting at mosquitoes, Ethan forced himself into his least wrinkled shirt and decided to go to the office. In his mind, the firing had to be a bluff or a temporary punishment. He would throw himself at my father's feet, apologize, promise to change. Maybe Dad would cool down. He rode a crowded bus to the skyscraper where Harrison Group's logo gleamed above the entrance. Straightening his collar, he strode toward the turnstiles and tapped his employee badge against the scanner, expecting the familiar green light. Instead, a sharp buzzer sounded and the screen flashed red. Access denied. He tried again and again, each rejection drawing more attention. People in line behind him grumbled and stared. Before he could lash out at the machine, 2 security guards approached. One of them was the same man Ethan used to send out for cigarettes. Today, his face was completely unreadable. He told Ethan, formally, that he was not allowed to enter the building. His name was on the internal blacklist. From under the reception desk, he pulled a cardboard box filled with Ethan's belongings from his desk. A cracked mug, some pens, a photo of me in a broken frame, and a sealed envelope. On the sidewalk outside, Ethan opened the envelope with shaking hands. The termination letter inside was cold and precise, citing serious breaches of ethics, misappropriation of company property, and behavior damaging to the corporation's reputation. There would be no severance, no recommendation, only a warning that failure to return any remaining company assets could lead to criminal charges. Dizzy with panic, Ethan moved to the nearest park bench and started calling every contact he had in the industry. One by one, his former friends told him the same thing. The business world was small, my father was powerful, and no reputable company wanted a manager fired for dishonesty and theft on their team. A week later, another envelope arrived, this time from the court. I had filed for divorce. Ethan's eyes lit up with a familiar calculating glint when he realized what that could mean: marital property. In 3 years of marriage, my father's gifts and my own hard work had created a comfortable life. Ethan convinced himself he deserved at least half. Linda fanned the flames, insisting he demand not just apartments and cars, but also shares of the company and a chunk of my business. Scraping together the last of their cash, they hired a cheap lawyer whose main talent was making big promises over a plastic desk in a dusty strip mall. On the day of the hearing, Ethan wore his best surviving shirt, now hanging a little loose after weeks of stress. He sat at the defendant's table, trying to look fragile and wronged. When I walked in, he almost didn't recognize me. I wore a deep blue dress and a simple, elegant headscarf, my face calm, my posture straight. I wasn't alone. Beside me stood a team of sharp-eyed attorneys from one of the top family law firms in the country. When the discussion turned to property, Ethan's lawyer leapt to his feet, demanding half of everything: houses, cars, investments, arguing that Ethan had sacrificed and supported me. Our lead lawyer didn't raise his voice. He simply requested permission to present an independent forensic audit of our finances. From a large box, he pulled stacks of bank statements, credit card records, and transfer slips. Slowly, methodically, he walked the court through 3 years of transactions. The pattern was undeniable. Ethan had never once deposited a cent into our shared household account. Every vacation, every designer bag Linda flaunted, every renovation on her little house back in her hometown had been paid for with my credit cards or funds my father had given me. What Ethan called gifts from my wife were, on paper, unauthorized debts run up in my name. The total, after interest and penalties, approached $200,000. When my lawyer finished, the judge looked over her glasses at Ethan, her expression hard. Under oath, I finally broke my silence. I explained that I had endured it to keep the marriage together, to honor my vows, but that Ethan's greed had turned patience into foolishness. Since Ethan had opened the door by demanding marital property, my lawyer filed a counterclaim. We requested that he be held responsible for repaying the money he and his mother had spent. As collateral, we asked the court to seize any asset clearly bought with those funds, including Linda's treasured house. The decision came down like a hammer. The judge granted the divorce, rejected all of Ethan's claims, and ruled that he was liable for the debts. Linda's house, proudly purchased and renovated on my credit, was ordered seized and slated for auction. In the back of the courtroom, Linda screamed and collapsed, overwhelmed by the realization that her lifelong symbol of success was gone. Medics rushed in. Ethan just sat there, numb, as if his bones had been hollowed out. When I left the room, I didn't look back. The chapter of my life with him had closed in that echo of the judge's gavel. The fall after that was fast and brutal. With the house seized and months of unpaid rent on their city rental, Ethan and Linda were evicted. They ended up in a tiny room at the end of a muddy alley on the edge of town. Walls of bare brick, a leaking roof, and the stink of the open drain right outside the door. Gone were the plush mattresses and cold air conditioning. They slept on thin mats on the concrete floor, sweating through the nights and swatting at mosquitoes. Their former friends from the social club stopped calling. No one wanted to be seen with the viral, fake rich family. To survive, Linda started taking in laundry for the factory workers who lived nearby. Her once pampered hands turned rough and cracked from cheap detergent and endless scrubbing. She often cried quietly in the bathroom as she rinsed other women's clothes, remembering the days she'd sipped tea in expensive cafes. Ethan, blacklisted from every office job he applied for, finally swallowed his pride and found work at the wholesale market, hauling sacks of rice and vegetables from trucks to stalls all night for a few crumpled bills. His shoulders, once used to resting against ergonomic office chairs, now ached from real weight. Every evening he trudged back to the cramped room, shirt soaked with sweat, feet sore in broken sandals. Instead of comfort, he found more shouting. Linda blamed him for not handling me better, for letting a rich wife slip away. He blamed her for pushing him into showing off and lies. Their arguments shook the thin walls, dishes sometimes cracking as they slammed around the room. Neighbors banged on the walls and threatened to have them thrown out if the fighting continued. Whatever affection had once existed between mother and son had turned into a bitter, endless loop of regret and resentment. A year passed. For those who are patient, time can be a healer. For those who refuse to learn, it simply deepens the lesson. One afternoon, in a high-end restaurant overlooking the city's busiest boulevard, my father and I sat across from each other at a window table. The marble floor shone. The air smelled of coffee and grilled steak, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. We were celebrating the opening of the 5th branch of my modest fashion boutique line, a business I had rebuilt with my own hands and my father's guidance. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace in my own life. As we shared dessert, my eyes drifted toward the large glass window beside us. Outside, the world felt like another planet: honking cars, harsh sunlight, and the endless motion of people in a hurry. Near the entrance of the restaurant, a small commotion caught my attention. A parking attendant in a faded orange vest was being screamed at by the owner of a luxury sedan, furious about a minor scratch. The attendant kept bowing his head, hands pressed together in apology, clearly terrified of being hit or reported. His skin was darkened from years in the sun, his hair unwashed, his body frighteningly thin. I squinted, something about his profile tugging at my memory. When he turned his head, my breath caught. It was Ethan. My ex-husband, who once bragged about his tailored shirts and company car, now stood in worn shorts and cheap flip-flops, begging a stranger for mercy over a job that paid him coins. A few meters away, sitting on the curb with a small box of tissues and disposable masks, was an older woman in a washed-out dress. She called out to pedestrians in a thin, hoarse voice, asking them to buy a packet for spare change. Even under the dirt and wrinkles, I recognized Linda. Ethan eventually looked up, his eyes wandering across the glass front of the restaurant. For a moment, our gazes locked. I saw shock, shame, and a desperation so raw it almost hurt to witness. He saw me dressed well, relaxed, smiling faintly across the table at my father. He saw plates of food worth more than his week's earnings. Between us stood a wall of spotless glass that might as well have been the wall between two different lives. In his eyes, I could read the question, the plea for some sign that I would step out and offer him another chance. There was no hatred in me anymore. Hatred takes energy, and I had long since stopped wasting mine on him. What I felt was something colder and kinder at the same time. Distance. The past was a story I had already finished. My father noticed where I was looking. He glanced outside, recognized Ethan and Linda, and then returned his gaze to me without a word. All he did was smile gently and nod, as if asking, "Are you ready to close this for good?" I inhaled slowly, then raised my hand to call the waiter. When the waiter came, I didn't point outside or explain anything. I simply said, "The sunlight is a little harsh. Could you close the curtain, please?" He nodded and pulled the heavy gold drapes down, inch by inch, until the street disappeared from view. On the other side of that fabric, Ethan stood in the heat, and Linda held out her tissues to passing strangers. On our side, the room grew softer, dimmer, peaceful. For me, it wasn't just the window that closed. It was the last open page of a book I no longer needed to reread. 5 years later, on a rainy morning at the wholesale market, Ethan sat hunched over a chipped mug of watery coffee in a wooden shack that called itself a cafe. His hair had begun to gray at the temples, his face was lined and older than his years, and his once bright eyes were dulled by exhaustion and too many cigarettes. Beside him lay the strap of the cart he used to haul vegetables at night. The owner turned up the volume on an old TV balanced on a shelf. A news program was starting a segment about inspiring women entrepreneurs. The camera showed a large modern house with a wide garden and children's laughter drifting through the open doors. Then it cut to a woman in a beautifully cut dress and soft headscarf, smiling confidently at the interviewer. It was me. Sitting beside me was my new husband, an architect with kind eyes, holding our little boy on his lap. We talked about our growing fashion brand, about exporting overseas, and about the charity foundation we had started to support women abandoned or financially abused by their partners. I spoke openly about a painful past, but I never once mentioned Ethan's name. In my story, he no longer existed. In that cramped coffee stall, Ethan's chest tightened as if someone had reached in and squeezed his heart. He saw the life he could have shared but had thrown away for ego and his mother's pride. He thought of Linda, now partially paralyzed by a stroke, lying in their tiny rented room, dependent on him for everything and moaning in her sleep about the house she'd lost. He thought of every time he'd laughed at my modest taxi rides, every time he'd told me I didn't need comfort because I was too simple. Now he was the one who couldn't afford a ride home. He left a few coins on the counter and stepped back into the drizzle, heading toward the market to start another shift under the weight of other people's goods. The rain mixed with tears on his face, but no one could tell the difference. That was the real punishment, not just poverty, but knowing that he had once held a diamond in his hands and traded it for fool's gold. If this story hit you, let me know in the comments, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the most important lessons come from watching exactly what not to do.